What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the WVSports.com podcast. We are a full week into fall camp for the Mountaineer football team, and we will also talk about the first two games of West Virginia men's basketball's Italy tour. But first, let's get into the football portion of everything. Obviously, since we last came to you, there have been two open practice availabilities, which Keenan has been at both. So, Keenan, let's just start here with what are two main takeaways or observations that you've seen thus far in the last two practices that you've been at?
Today was about like I expected. They went full pad yesterday for the first time. A lot of 11 on 11, a lot of hitting. That was closed to the media, so we didn't get to see that. So I expected today to be lighter. Neil confirmed that in his post-practice interview. He talked a little bit about how it was going to be a lighter day, but you still learn some stuff. Being able to watch guys go around, play some different spots. A lot of special teams work today. I was encouraged with what I seen. I didn't see a lot of muff punts or anything like that. I think that they're working a lot on blocking kicks. A lot of different circuits, a lot of things designed to work on special teams, and that jobs with what we heard in the spring. It's really been a focus to kind of get those areas and shore them up. Ollie Straw had a great punt, kind of coffin cornered it inside the 10. And they had people down there to field it too. So I think that was encouraging. I've seen a lot of good things out of the return guys. They've mixed in a lot of different guys. Preston Fox is probably going to be that guy on punt return. He's kind of elite there, as Neil mentioned today in his press conference. So I don't think you're worried there, but you saw some of the kick returners. No real physical 11 on 11 stuff today. So I can't sit here and say, hey, man, I watched all these guys in pads going at it. That didn't happen. Did see some personnel groupings, though. You can tell that yesterday was a physical day. You had some guys in red, some guys that weren't, taking it easy today, like Wyatt Milam. He wasn't in red, but he was taking it easy. Trey Lathan had, Neil said his hand was a little banged up. He's going to be out a day or two. Anthony Wilson wasn't out there, but you saw some of those other guys that we've heard a lot kind of mix in, in the secondary, some of those new guys they brought in. So I think that was encouraging. Some different personnel groupings today. You saw, the first team unit on defense. I'm going to call it the first team unit. It's not a depth chart, but it's the unit that's really been working there for most of camp. Today you had Caden Beiser in there. Jaheim Joseph was in there filling in, and some other guys that you hadn't really seen with that group. And then the second team unit was kind of the same, guys shuffled around on defense. Offense was pretty similar. Outside, you had Xavier Balsey was working the left tackle today because obviously, as I mentioned, Wyatt Milam was going a little light today. He wasn't doing a ton when it comes to that because Neil said they treat all players equally, but some guys get a little bit of a added incentive because of who they are and what they mean to the team. So, but overall, I think that I was encouraged with some play of the quarterbacks. I like what West Virginia has there. I think it's a deep group. We all know what Garrett Green can do. We all know what Nico Markiel could do to this point, but I like what I've seen out of Ryder Burton. Throws the ball well on the move. He's athletic. I think he's going to fit what they want at that position moving forward. And Khalil Wilkins had some pretty good plays today, just throwing on air. You expect it to be good, but the guy that really impresses me at wide receiver, I mentioned Preston Fox, and that continues to be true, but Hudson Clement continues to make plays. I know it's a drill, it's on air, but God just makes catches. I don't think I've seen him drop a pass since I've been out there. If he has, I haven't seen it. So knock on wood, hopefully that doesn't become an issue, but he's looked very well. They worked some screen game too. It's something they did the other day. Really kind of unique thing. They had guys lined up all over in different ways and presenting a lot of different screen work, which I thought was interesting. And of course, they always do some triple option stuff. You think maybe it'll be in the thing, but we'll see. I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be part of the offense, but they do work it. And Day Farmer, again, continues to look – the guy just looks very natural when he has the football in his hands. He's smaller than you'd expect, I guess, but Neil mentioned today he's a lot stronger than he is at that size than you would expect. So I think he's going to find a way onto the field because he just looks so smooth when he gets the ball in his hands.
Let's go back to kick return for a second. That's an area of emphasis that we both kind of circled before fall camp began of where we want to see this team improve. From what you've seen, do you think there's a guy that's kind of emerging there, or do you even think that it looks promising that they will have a better type of success rate or production on that unit this year from what you can tell?
I think they've got guys. Now, I'm not ready to say someone is the guy or guys, two guys out there, but I think what's really going to help them more than anything are the other bodies they have. They like to call them those mid guys. They lacked that last year, and it hurt them in kickoff return and kickoff coverage. They've got more of those linebacker, running back, tight end type bodies that they can trust in games, and I think that's going to help them a lot. They do got some athletes back there. It'll be interesting for me to see who gets that. Maybe even a guy like Jaheim White. Sorry, I got two guys mixed together, but Jaheim White could be a possibility back there at some point. Maybe just how dynamic he is. I mentioned Day Farmer. You go down the list, Traylon Ray. There's a lot of options they could go to, and I'll be interested to see, which ones emerge above the pack, because we're not going to see a lot of full kickoff. It's just not going to happen. They're going to work individual drills and kind of focus on the areas, but that is an area that I do think it has to improve both sides, especially covering kicks, but returning as well. So it's a focus. They know it's a focus. It's been a focus since the spring, and I think it's going to continue to be a focus.
And then obviously today, for those who might not know or heard Keenan, Neil Brown did speak with the media today. One thing that, before we kind of dive into him, just were you able to get a sense of, I know their schedule, they're like a third of the way through basically. So as far as evaluation goes and getting guys in places where they feel confident as far as spots, do you know or have a feel of where they might be in that process? And did Neil possibly give any insight into that?
I think they're getting closer. You really find out after the second scrimmage. They're going to have their first scrimmage this weekend, this Saturday. Yesterday was their first really big physical practice, and that's going to continue to develop. They want to be physical. They've talked about it a lot. It's a focus point. They've got to be more physical. They've got to be more game-like, because quite frankly, Neil said their effort in game one last year wasn't good enough, and they're going to play the same Penn State team this year. So that's going to be a challenge for them. And I think they're going to have to be ready in ways that maybe they weren't ready last year. And what helps with that is there's more continuity on both sides of the ball. They return a lot of people, they return a lot of the same things, and they can build on that. But as far as outlining a depth chart, I think some spots who's going to play. Garrett Green's going to be your quarterback.
Right.
Jaheim White and CJ Donaldson are going to be your 1A, 1B in the backfield. Cole Taylor's going to play tight end. Wyatt Milam is your left tackle. There are spots that are settled. Whether the coaches want to admit that or not. There are also other spots that I think they want to see healthy competition at. I think that two guys that I think have emerged just based on what coaches have said and what I've observed is Aiden Garnes and Garnett Hollis. I think today those are your top two corners, and they both played very well in camp. And I think that they have more versatility back there. We've touched on that a lot. Guys can bounce around. You saw that today. With Anthony Wilson out there, they slid a guy in, and they could do that. Last year, that might have been a lot more detrimental. So I think that having guys that can move around, bounce around is going to help. I think the depth chart they released, whether they want to admit it or not, is close to where they want to end up. But you're going to have guys that emerge. You always do. I think there's going to be room for guys like, a guy that wasn't even on there, Justin Robinson at receiver. He's big, he's long, he has a chance to play. Day Farmer has a chance to play. There's guys on defense that are going to have a chance to play. But there's depth. And really, that's that dirty word almost in fall camp a lot here. But you can see it for the first time, I think, in a while. There's quality depth at some spots that there just hasn't been. And linebacker sticks out, secondary sticks out, and especially offensive line. Matt Moore said today that, this is the best he's felt, and I don't think that's coach speak. I do feel like this looks like a group that I don't think you're going to play 9 guys. I don't think this is going to be a hockey-style rotation type deal. But if a guy goes down, you're going to have confidence in the guy stepping up behind him in most of those spots.
Yeah, I think one thing, especially as you talk about the offensive line, is you're never going to be healthy there throughout the entire year. And especially as you get into these games late in the year, heck, in the final game of the year, right, on the last drive, you saw Zach Frazier have to exit immediately. And so there's going to be those types of things within drives, within games where guys are going to have to plug in those holes. And I think one thing that's helped is that they've retained a lot of those younger guys who haven't seen the field and haven't lost guys to the portal there just because they haven't been playing. And that has truly helped them develop. Guys like Johnny Williams, guys like Sully Weedman, right? Like we've seen them stay in the program despite not playing just because of the talent and top end talent that this offensive line has had. And I think as you lose two starters and one of them Zach Frazier, that continuity for Matt Moore and being able to kind of reach down into that bag of players on his line that he knows and he can trust because they've been here for a good amount of time. I think that's crucial.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that you can really spread that out across most positions. Yeah, I do think you have to tip the cap a little bit to what West Virginia's done with retention. They've done a much better job. You look back at 2020, 2021, how hard this roster was hit with, losing guys that not only, experienced guys, but guys that you were going to count on in the future. That hasn't happened as much. And I think a lot to be said with the plan they have there and how they've gone about it. Now, that's probably going to change some with changes that are happening in NCAA football. They're going to have to figure out different ways to get around that with roster sizes going to 105 and all this other stuff that's probably going to confuse people. So I won't go too deep into it, but I think that they've got a good plan that works right now. And you're seeing the fruits of that labor with some young kids that really they can trust to play. I think that right now, Matt Moore would trust Johnny Williams to go in the game. I think that he would trust Nick Cray. I definitely know he would trust Xavier Ballsy or on the other side, look at what Nick Malone's done just by sticking with the program and potential. And he could be a potential starter this year. And I think that stuff is a lot harder than it was a few years ago, just to try to get guys to stick around. Cause we all grew up loving college football because guys develop, but this is a different game now and you have to adjust. And tip of the cap to West Virginia, their scouting department and everything they've done to kind of work on that area.
Pivoting a little bit here, going back to Day Farmer, he's obviously true freshman. Have there been any other true freshmen that have kind of caught your eye or just from what you've heard kind of have a chance at getting some playing time, maybe if not earlier in the year, just during the season in general?
Keon Washington at cornerback's a name that I've heard a lot more. And today I didn't even his number that he was wearing wasn't the number on the roster sheet. So I was confused there for a second when I wrote my observations, but I got back and I said, oh yeah, that's who it is. But he's a guy that's really come on kind of really unheralded. You didn't hear a lot about him. He was a guy they added later in the year after the summer. And, he's long. He looks confident out there. Zay Jennings is a guy we all know by now. I'll be shocked if he doesn't play in some capacity. I think he's definitely on special teams, maybe even some on defense. Receivers outside Day Farmer, I'm not sure yet. Both the true freshman running backs look good for what they're doing right now. Now, obviously, they're going to have to figure out pass protection and all that. But I think that both of them are kind of dynamic athletes. Both of them are fast. Both of them look big. That's the one thing that you can really see up and down the roster with a lot of these newcomers and a lot of these freshmen. They don't look like freshmen. Like we talked about this on the first episode of this podcast. Elijah Kinsler does not look like a freshman. Nate Gabriel does not look like a freshman on the defensive line. And I think that's a testament to the recruiting and the type of players they're going after. So I think Neil addressed this best when they asked him. I think he was asked this during his first press conference about freshmen. They don't need a lot of freshmen to play, but some freshmen are going to play. It's just a matter of which ones are going to separate themselves. And I think you'll really start to see that kind of emerge over the next week and a half, which guys are truly going to be in the mix, because at some point you're repping your two spot and everybody's getting reps, and then they're going to start getting cut down because you're getting closer to the season. You got to get prepared for the season. And just because a guy's standing out right now doesn't mean he's going to carry that momentum. We've seen freshmen hit the wall before. And we've seen freshmen emerge. They've struggled through the first part of fall camp and really emerged going forward. So there's a lot left to play out there. I think that you're going to see freshmen play. I do feel confident in saying that the two, if I had to pick two right now outside the defensive lineman, I'm not counting them because I think they need one of those guys, but I think it'd probably be Day Farmer and Zay Jennings.
And I think from what I'm hearing is it seems like West Virginia's in a spot where they kind of have the best of both worlds, right? Like you want to have freshmen that are talented enough to play, but you also want to be in a spot where your depth and experience is good enough where you're not having to throw true freshmen into a fire like Penn State will be, or into a fire like Kansas early on in September will be, right? And so I think that from the way they've been able, as we said, to retain the talent they have as well as develop the people that are inside the building, it means that true freshmen don't have to play and they're able to develop and not be rushed into something where their confidence goes down through the floor because they are in a situation that is just over their head. And I think you kind of touched on that with the guys who are ready and the guys who are not. But as you said, we have a long ways to go from now until August 31st, and they have two big time scrimmages with that I think will definitely tell the story there. So let's move on to some basketball, shall we? I know it is August, but basketball is alive and well. The men's basketball team, as well as the women's basketball team, is overseas, and the men's basketball team has played two of their three games. Their third game will come tomorrow on Thursday, and they picked up wins in both games, and I think there's a couple things that we can kind of point out. So, first game, I'll just kind of give you a quick recap here. 78-53 win. Team shot 42% from the field, 7 3-pointers made. They had 22 steals, 10 blocks, 40 total rebounds. They had a 3-point lead after the first quarter, but then outscored their opponent 28-10 in the second quarter before kind of coasting. So, starting five for that game: Javon Small, Jaden Stone, Toby Okani, Tucker DeVries, and Amani Hansberry. What were your kind of takeaways? Obviously, we didn't get eyes on them playing, but just what were you able to learn, Keenan, from just looking at the numbers and the results of things?
I think it's about what you expected. West Virginia is figuring each other out. You could play each other forever. It's good to play against another team. I think the thing that you've noticed in both of these games is a lot of people are playing, which is what you want to see. You're not going to throw Tucker DeVries out there for 35 minutes. It's not going to happen. Like, you don't need to. He's proven. You get to see some of these freshmen, some of these guys you're not as sure about, in real game situations. And I think that that's going to benefit them immensely. You get to see what lineups will work. You get to be more experimental because, the games don't count. You're out there trying to figure stuff out. I like what I've seen from Andre, just based off the stats. I haven't physically seen it, but based off the stats, I think that you're getting what you wanted out of him. Hansberry, the same thing. I think that those guys have to play a massive role in this basketball team. If they don't add another big, which they're still working on trying to do that, and I think that could change the complexion a little bit, but those are your two bigs, really, for the most part. And you're going to play a lot of 4-out kind of small ball type deal, but you need those guys to be effective, especially, to have a banger in the post like Andre. And he's put up numbers that you would expect him to have. I think the guards have been about what I thought, pretty good defensively for the most part. I think they played better in the second game than the first. A little bit of a slow start in the first game, but they're continuing to improve. And we'll be interested to see the third game. I don't think I keep trying to say this as nicely as I can. Yes, this stuff's important, but it's more important for the team than it is to try to read something from it, because Coach DeVries pretty much laid this out. They're doing this to kind of figure some stuff out about themselves. They can experiment more. They're not necessarily – I don't think it's you press the panic button and jump off the Star City Bridge if they would lose a game, out there, or if, you don't see Tucker DeVries with 25 points or anything like that. I don't think it's a situation, because you've seen Javon Small. We've all known what he's done in the Big 12. He's had pretty much modest numbers the first couple games, because I think a lot of that's by design. You know what you're getting out of him. You don't know what you're getting out of some of these other guys.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there should be any bold proclamations, either positive or negative, made off of these three games. One, we don't know what this competition's like, right? We just have zero idea how good some of these teams or how bad some of these teams are playing. But one thing that's kind of caught my attention is just how both starts have kind of been slow in the first quarter. And for those who don't know, they're playing 4 10-minute quarters here, not just two halves. But I really like how they've responded in the second quarter of both games. I think that I know in the first game they outscored them 28-10 in the second quarter, and in the second game they were up 22-15. West Virginia was after the first quarter, and then at halftime was up 55-26. So those two numbers kind of stand out to me of how they were kind of able to adjust from early on and what the other team's given them, and kind of go from that point on. I know Darian DeVries in a clip that WVU posted on social media and talking about his team's performance, said that the big thing from game 1 to game 2 was turnovers. 22 turnovers, he said, was in game 1 and then 9 in game 2. So you expect this team to turn the ball over, obviously, especially when they have all these new pieces. But for me, seeing that number go down significantly from game 1 to game 2 kind of shows the investment level, I think, and that they actually are trying to work together, trying to get that mesh point where they're all on the same page rather than them just saying, okay, turnovers were an issue in game 1, let's not do anything about it. Another thing for me was the defense. I think that when you can hold these teams to a small amount of points in these quarters, 10 points, few points here, few points there. Obviously, it kind of gets away from you when you empty the bench a little bit, but that defensive intensity, and then as well as sharing the basketball. I know that there's a lot of guys on this team who have skill, but obviously in the first game, you have a guy like Hansberry who had 14 and 10, and then in the second game, you have a guy like Jonathan Powell who had 24 points, right? So just getting guys looks, getting guys experience, getting different lineup combinations out there is just the point of this and what's kind of stood out to me through 2 games.
Yeah, you mentioned it too. I mean, they've got to take care of the basketball and they've got a defensive rebound. If they do those 2 things, it will go a long way. You know, you're not always going to make shots every night. I think I've been encouraged. The shooting numbers have been pretty good out there, but I don't expect them not to be. And so it kind of surprised me if they weren't. But as long as they can defensive rebound, you know, they work on that a lot. It's a big part of DeVries' principles, you know, being able to defensive rebound and avoid, you know, multiple shot opportunities for opponents, even with, you know, sometimes a smaller lineup. So if they can do those 2 things, you know, and walk away finding some other things out about some of these pieces on the roster, I think this trip was a massive success.
Yeah, I think the only way it could just be deemed not a success, right, is if someone gets hurt and it's serious. I think other than that, you're playing together against a different opponent, and that's almost all you can ask for this time of year. And you're also coming together, right? Like you're across the world with the same 10 guys. You kind of got to learn to like each other in one way or another. But to your point on rebounding and defense, in the second game, WVU forced 27 turnovers. They had 23 steals, 44 points off those turnovers. They had 31 second chance points, and they controlled the glass 56 to 31 and had 24 offensive rebounds. So
That's a winning
pretty good.
formula.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
that's a winning formula for this team.
and I think last year at times what frustrated was that kind of defensive intensity and that try and care to get a stop. And obviously, Ren Baker through this search said he wants a guy that can have his teams play defense and not be defensive focused, because I wouldn't say that's what DeVries really is, but I would say that there's a care of the defensive end. And seeing a guy like Javon Small, who in the first game he had 7 points in the first quarter, but in the second game he only had 6 points, but he also had 6 steals and 7 assists to go with that. So that's kind of the things that you want, is to see guys do more than just one thing. And I think that's another thing that we've seen so far through 2 games.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that so far, so good. And that's what you want out of this trip. And I think as long as, you know, when they get back and try to make any last minute roster additions, whether they do or don't, at least now you have a better idea of which guys are truly going to factor into the rotation. You're not going to start a guy because he goes and gets 24 points overseas, but you might be more apt to, hey, I think I can trust this guy to play minutes here, play minutes there. And I think West Virginia is going to need a lot of these guys. You know, Darren DeVries has some decisions to make on this roster. You know, I don't know how deep he wants to go. I don't know what the rotations are going to look like at this point, but this will help to sort it out a little bit.
Well, that's all we have for today. So if you made it this far, we do appreciate you listening. We will be back sometime this week with another episode as fall camp continues to roll on in Morgantown. And then tomorrow on Thursday, August 8th, West Virginia men's basketball wraps up their 3-game trip to Italy. So be sure to keep following us on all of our social media channels and look at us on the site at westvirginiarivals.com. For Keenan Cummings, I'm Wesley Shoemaker, and this was the WestVirginiaSports.com podcast.